Somewhere beneath the deserts of northern China, a missile sits inside a silo that did not exist 5 years ago. It has never been fired. It may never be fired. But its presence has already changed how the rest of the world counts. For decades, China kept its nuclear arsenal small, almost an afterthought next to the vast stockpiles built during the Cold War. That era is over. Satellites now track hundreds of new silos, rising out of the sand, in rows, in grids, spaced with the kind of precision that only shows up when a country intends to fill every one of them eventually. Submarines slip out of hidden pens on Hainan Island. Bombers once stripped of their nuclear role are being armed again, decades after that mission was quietly shelved. This is the story of that arsenal, warhead by warhead, missile by missile, told through the machines built to carry it. Some of these weapons are decades old. Some have never been photographed at all. All of them are real, and all of them, in one way or another, are part of a number that keeps climbing. Chapter 1: The Silent Giants. Start with the number itself. Around 620 warheads, according to the most recent estimates from the Federation of American Scientists, echoed closely by the Pentagon's own assessments. That makes China's stockpile the third largest on the planet, trailing only the United States and Russia, but closing that gap faster than almost anyone predicted a decade ago. Here is the strange part. Nearly all of those warheads sit apart from their missiles, stored separately in facilities scattered across the country, a legacy of a doctrine built on caution rather than constant readiness. 3 branches of the military share this arsenal between them. The Rocket Force owns the land-based missiles. The Navy operates the submarines. The Air Force, only in recent years, has rejoined a mission it once abandoned entirely. Command authority sits jointly with the Politburo and the Central Military Commission, a two-key arrangement meant to make any accidental or unilateral launch effectively impossible. That posture, though, is quietly shifting. Some units are reportedly moving toward a launch on warning stance, a much faster trigger than the country has ever used before. The oldest member of that land-based force is the DF-5, a liquid-fueled missile that has sat in fixed underground silos since the early 1980s. Liquid fuel is slower to prepare for launch, a genuine tactical weakness, since fueling a missile of this size can take a significant amount of time before it is ready to fire. Time an adversary's own early warning systems might notice, but it buys something in return: enormous throw weight. The DF-5B variant, introduced around 2015, can carry as many as 5 independently targetable warheads on a single missile, each one estimated in the range of 200 to 300 kilotons. And then there is the detail that keeps arms control analysts awake at night. One version of this missile family is believed to carry a single warhead, measured not in kilotons, but in multiple megatons, among the largest nuclear payloads still active anywhere on Earth. This is not a weapon built for precision, it is built for scale, the kind of blunt force calculus that dates back to an earlier era of deterrence thinking, when accuracy mattered less than sheer destructive potential. Numbers here are small compared to what follows. Roughly 6 older DF-5A missiles still in service alongside a dozen of the newer DF-5B, yet those 18 missiles alone account for a meaningful share of the total megatonnage sitting in China's land-based force. In 2025, at a parade meant to put decades of quiet modernization on public display, a new variant of this old missile rolled through the streets of Beijing, the DF-5C. Same silo-based architecture, same liquid fuel heritage, but with one detail that unsettled observers almost immediately. State media described its range, over 12,000 kilometers, using the phrase global covering. Some analysts read that as marketing, others read it as something more specific, a hint that this particular missile might be capable of skimming through a partial low orbit before descending on a target from a direction no early warning radar was built to expect. Whether that capability is fully confirmed remains genuinely unclear, and Beijing has offered no clarification, letting the ambiguity itself do the work. This one was different from the rest, not because of anything mechanical, but because of how deliberately the government let the world see it. Chapter 2. The Movers. If the DF-5 family represents patience, decades sitting in a fixed hole in the ground, the road mobile missiles represent motion. The DF-31A and its upgraded sibling, the DF-31AG, run on solid fuel, which means they can be readied for launch far faster than anything liquid-fueled ever could. They travel across the country on massive transporter erector launchers, dispersing through highway tunnels and mountain roads where satellites lose track of them for hours or days at a time. A single DF-31A can carry a warhead estimated near 1 megaton, or split its payload across several smaller warheads depending on the mission. Both variants use a cold launch method, ejected clear of the tube by gas pressure before the main engine ever ignites, a design that protects the launcher itself and allows it to be reused or relocated within minutes. The entire design philosophy comes down to one idea: a missile that cannot be found, cannot be destroyed before it launches, and that principle alone has shaped Chinese missile design for a generation, favoring dispersal and concealment over the fixed, if powerful, predictability of a silo. Sitting above the DF-31 in both size and reputation is the DF-41, routinely described as China's single most capable weapon. Depending on the unit, it launches from a road mobile platform or from a fixed silo, and it carries multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles, meaning one missile can strike several separate targets at once, each warhead following its own path after separation. Its range exceeds 12,000 kilometers, enough to reach nearly any point on Earth from Chinese territory. When it was first shown publicly, foreign analysts spent weeks studying the parade footage frame by frame, counting warhead compartments on the nose cone, measuring the dimensions of the transporter itself, trying to extract engineering detail from a few seconds of broadcast video. Few weapons in this entire arsenal have generated that much attention from a single television broadcast. Few people remember that even before the DF-41 program was fully mature, quiet rumors of something newer were already circulating among analysts who study these parades for a living. That something finally arrived in 2025. The DF-61, unveiled at the same parade that introduced the DF-5C, and almost immediately flagged by outside observers as a likely evolution of the DF-41 design, sharing enough visual similarities in its transporter and canister that analysts drew the connection within hours of the broadcast. Public details remain thin, deliberately so. What is known is that it runs on solid fuel, launches from road mobile platforms, and is expected to eventually take over some portion of the DF-41's mission set. As of today, it stands as the newest confirmed addition to China's intercontinental missile family, though in an arsenal expanding this quickly, newest rarely stays true for very long. Chapter 3. Reach and Ambiguity. Not every missile in this arsenal was designed for global reach. The DF-26 was built with a narrower job in mind, striking targets at intermediate range, somewhere around 4,000 kilometers, far enough to matter regionally without needing intercontinental scale. Analysts sometimes call it by an informal nickname, tied to the American territory it can reach at that distance, though the Chinese military has never used that label itself. What makes the DF-26 genuinely unusual is its dual nature. The exact same launcher, the exact same missile body, can be loaded with either a conventional warhead or a nuclear one, swapped out depending entirely on the mission profile assigned that day. Crews trained specifically for this hot swap capability, a detail that complicates any outside assessment of what a given DF-26 unit is actually carrying at any given moment, on any given day. That ambiguity is not an accident of design. In many ways, it is the entire point, a deliberate fog placed over the missile's true role. Then there is a missile that barely existed on paper only a few years ago, and now sits close to entering full service: the DF-27. longer ranged than the DF-26, stretching toward 8,000 kilometers in some estimates, and fitted with a hypersonic glide vehicle rather than a conventional re-entry warhead. Early flight tests reportedly covered over 2,000 kilometers in roughly 12 minutes, a glimpse of a weapon designed to maneuver through the final phase of flight, rather than simply fall along a predictable arc. Whether every fielded unit carries a nuclear payload or a conventional one is, once again, left deliberately unclear by Chinese officials. Some assessments place its introduction as far back as the late 2010s in limited numbers, while others describe it as still working toward full operational status, closer to 2026. Either way, it stands as one of the newest confirmed members of the rocket force's entire inventory, and one of the hardest to categorize cleanly as purely nuclear or purely conventional. This one barely had a name before it had a flight record, tested quietly long before Beijing ever acknowledged it existed. Chapter 4. The Hidden Fleet. Land-based missiles get most of the public attention, mostly because they can be photographed by satellites sitting still in a field. But the sea leg of the triad tells its own story, one that unfolds almost entirely out of sight. 6 Type 094 Jin-class submarines form the backbone of that story, based out of a naval facility on Hainan Island in the South China Sea, tucked into pens carved directly into the coastline to shield them from overhead observation. Each boat can carry up to 12 submarine-launched ballistic missiles, and each one can remain submerged and silent for weeks at a stretch. A survivable second strike option that no satellite can meaningfully track once the hull disappears beneath the surface. The first missile those submarines carried was the JL-2, part of a missile family whose name translates roughly to giant wave, with a range of roughly 7,000 kilometers, respectable for its era but limited compared to what eventually replaced it. Interestingly, the very first missile to ever carry that giant wave name was a different weapon entirely, tested decades earlier from a converted diesel submarine, a program that struggled through repeated failures before it was ever fully trusted with a warhead. That original lineage eventually gave way to the JL-2, and then to the JL-3, now believed to be standard across the entire operational fleet, with a range exceeding 10,000 kilometers, far enough to threaten targets across much of the continental United States without the submarine ever needing to leave waters closer to home. American naval officials have publicly stated that the transition from JL-2 to JL-3 across the fleet is now effectively complete, a quiet milestone that received far less coverage than any land-based missile parade. This one rarely gets mentioned outside specialist circles, and yet it may quietly be the single most survivable weapon China owns. Waiting in the wings is the Type 096. A next-generation submarine still under active development, expected to be quieter, larger, and built specifically around the JL-3 or an even longer-range successor still to come. Almost nothing about its actual construction has been confirmed through public sources. No launch photographs, no confirmed hull numbers, only fragments pieced together from shipyard imagery. What is confirmed is the intent behind it. A submarine fleet designed for the 2030s and beyond, not simply an incremental upgrade of the boats already patrolling today. Naval analysts expect it to run quieter than any Chinese submarine before it, closing a gap that has long separated China's undersea deterrent from the far stealthier boats operated by the United States and Russia. Chapter 5. Wings over the Pacific. For decades, the air leg of China's nuclear triad was effectively dormant. Bombers existed, plenty of them, but the nuclear mission attached to those aircraft had faded almost entirely, a relic of the 1960s and 70s. When early H-6 aircraft occasionally carried gravity bombs during the country's earliest atmospheric weapons tests that ended, officially at least, back in 1986. That changed with the introduction of the H-6N, a heavily modified variant fitted with aerial refueling capability and a distinctive under-fuselage recess built specifically to carry one large missile rather than a bay of conventional bombs, a visible external clue that gave analysts their first hint of the aircraft's new role. That missile is the JL-1, an air-launched ballistic missile carried exclusively by the H-6N. Curiously, the name is a recycled one, borrowed from an entirely different weapon decades earlier, an old submarine-launched missile from the very first generation of China's sea-based deterrent. The new JL-1 shares nothing with that old system, except the label, a small naming quirk that occasionally trips up even careful researchers. Its arrival on the H-6N effectively completed the modern nuclear triad for the first time since China began developing nuclear weapons back in 1964. A bomber that can refuel mid-flight, carrying a missile built specifically for it, gives commanders a flexible, recallable option that neither a submarine nor a buried silo can ever really offer. Unlike a missile already in flight, a bomber can be turned around after a launch order is given, right up until the missile actually leaves the aircraft. That single characteristic makes it strategically unique, whatever its technical limitations might be, elsewhere in the arsenal. Even the number of H-6N aircraft assigned this mission remains a subject of debate, with estimates ranging from under 20 to several dozen, depending on which imagery analysts are consulted. Few people outside the analyst community realized how long that air leg had been dormant until it suddenly was not anymore. Chapter 6. The Foundry Beneath the Desert. None of this expansion happens without infrastructure, and this is where the story shifts from individual weapons to the machinery behind them. In the deserts of the Northwest, near Yumen, Hami, and Ordos, 3 entirely new missile fields have risen since the early 2020s. Identified first, not by any official announcement, but by independent researchers scrolling through commercial satellite imagery. Together, those fields account for more than 350 new silos, arranged with a regularity that leaves little doubt about their purpose. The Pentagon's own reporting now confirms that over 100 of these silos, clustered near the border with Mongolia, have already been loaded with solid-fueled missiles from the DF-31 family. Most of the remaining silos still sit empty, waiting, which raises its own quiet question. Empty for now does not mean empty for long. Counted together with China's road-mobile launchers, some assessments now place the country's total land-based missile force above 700 units, a figure that, if accurate, would already exceed the equivalent land-based forces of both the United States and Russia, combined with their submarine fleets left aside. Behind those silos sits an equally important, far less visible layer, the factories that actually build the warheads. Analysis of China's roughly 136 known missile production facilities found that more than 60% showed visible signs of expansion between 2020 and 2025. New buildings, new security perimeters, new access roads appearing where none existed before. In Sichuan province, imagery analysts have tracked a major overhaul at sites tied to pit production, the fissile core at the heart of every warhead, with reporting as recent as April 2026, describing an ongoing rebuild of facilities in the Zhejiang County area. To feed all of this, China has also completed one of 2 planned fast breeder reactors at Xiapu, a reactor type specifically suited to producing the plutonium these new warheads will eventually need, with construction on its twin still underway. And then there is Lop Nur, the remote test site in Xinjiang, where China's very first nuclear detonation took place back in 1964. Officially, atmospheric testing there ended in 1986. Unofficially, activity at the site has continued in quieter forms ever since, and satellite imagery between 2024 and 2026 has shown continued tunnel construction and infrastructure work that outside analysts have struggled to fully explain. American officials have gone as far as describing a mysterious 2020 event at the site as a singular explosion, inconsistent with either an earthquake or a routine mining blast, feeding speculation that some form of low-yield testing may already be underway beneath the surface. testing that would fall well short of the treaty threshold that ended full-scale detonations decades ago. This one rarely makes it into any parade, and yet it may matter more than anything that ever does. Chapter 7. The Next Frontier. Everything covered so far exists today, deployed, tested, counted by analysts poring over satellite images year after year. What comes next belongs to a different category entirely: weapons and platforms, either newly operational or still emerging from development, each one aimed at a specific technological edge rather than raw numbers. The DFZF is already flying, in the sense that matters. A hypersonic glide vehicle, launched atop a modified ballistic missile booster, capable of maneuvering through the upper atmosphere at extreme speed instead of following the predictable arc of a traditional re-entry vehicle. Because it can adjust course mid-flight rather than simply falling toward a fixed point, existing missile defense systems built around predictable trajectories struggle to intercept it at all. It has been tested multiple times over the past several years, and is now considered fully operational, one of the more mature hypersonic systems fielded by any nation on Earth. Related in concept, but genuinely distinct in execution, is something China tested back in 2021, a fractional orbital bombardment system. Rather than following a conventional ballistic trajectory, a FOBS-capable missile can place its payload into a partial low orbit, potentially approaching a target from an unexpected direction, even looping over the South Pole, bypassing the geography that most existing early warning radar networks were originally built around, since those networks were designed to watch the northern approach, not the southern one. The 2021 test caught many outside observers genuinely off guard, precisely because the flight path did not resemble a conventional missile test at all until analysts pieced together what it actually meant days after the launch itself. This one was different. It did not look like a weapons test at first glance, and that was exactly the point. And then there is the platform almost nobody has actually seen with their own eyes. The H-20, a stealth bomber that Chinese officials have publicly acknowledged is in active development, discussed in state media, referenced in official government statements, but never once shown in an actual photograph or a confirmed flight test. Persistent rumors describe a flying wing design conceptually similar to America's B-2, built for long-range penetrating missions rather than the tactical refueling role the H-6N currently fills. Until it finally appears, whether through a leaked image or an official unveiling on Beijing's own terms, everything about the H-20 remains informed speculation rather than confirmed fact. A rare instance in this arsenal where the curiosity comes entirely from absence rather than detail. This one might be the strangest entry on the entire list, a weapon that shapes strategic planning purely by existing in rumor. Taken together, these next-generation programs point toward an arsenal that is not simply growing in raw warhead count, but diversifying in method. Hypersonic glide vehicles, orbital delivery concepts, stealth aircraft, next-generation submarines, each one designed to close a specific gap in what the current inventory can already do, and each one drawing on lessons learned from the systems that came before it. The trajectory itself is not subtle. From roughly 200 warheads back in 2020 to over 600 today, and a standing Pentagon projection placing China above 1,000 operational warheads by the year 2030. At a sustained production pace estimated near 100 new warheads a year, that number is not a ceiling, it is a waypoint. Every weapon covered here, from the oldest liquid-fueled giant still resting in a 1980s silo, to a stealth bomber that has never once been photographed, belongs to the same accelerating curve. 16 distinct systems, spanning land, sea, and air, some counted in dozens, others counted in rumor alone. What began 6 decades ago as a single test device in the desert of Lop Nur has become one of the most closely watched military buildups of this century, tracked missile by missile, silo by silo, by analysts who often have little more to work with than a satellite photograph and a shadow on the sand. And as of 2026, that curve, by every available estimate, shows no sign of slowing down.